Hail, it's Stasi, and today we're going to be talking about all of the books I've read over the past 3 months. So in April, May, and June, I think I completed a total of 8 books, which previously, I think that's pretty much my average I've read per month. And I've started other things, but I just haven't finished them. I definitely haven't been reading as much as usual, obviously, and I've also been reading a lot of things that felt kind of mediocre, which hasn't really been encouraging the reading. But then I've also been busy with a lot of other things. You would have seen some vlogs that have gone up on my channel of things, of other things I've been spending my time doing. Like April, I only finished 2 books because I went to New Zealand for a couple of weeks, and I also had DreamHack, which again there are vlogs up for. So that was kind of where most of my time was spent. I then also got really sick for like 6 weeks, so I didn't really have the brain power to do much of anything. But then I've also been spending a lot of time on other things. Like you'll see there's a bunch of stuff here because I have my first convention like next weekend. I'm selling in Artist Alley at Metro Comic Con. So that's what all of this kind of stuff is. Look, I've even got crochet bees. But yeah, so I've been dedicating a lot of time to other things like art and trying to get that organized, and you know, going out and doing things and going to events. And I've also been really active with my content, like everywhere but YouTube, basically. This has probably been my most consistent content year, even for YouTube actually, because even though I haven't posted much in the past couple of months, before that I was posting weekly, and that kind of went downhill because I got really sick. But yeah, this has actually been my most active like content year as well. I've been posting daily to TikTok, multiple videos a day, and yeah, there's been a lot going on. As I said, I'm selling at some events this year. I've also got creator passes. Obviously I had it for DreamHack. I also have a creator pass for PAX. So there's lots of things being organized in the background, and then obviously I'm also a full-time teacher. So all that to say, these are all reasons I haven't been reading very much, and it hasn't been a priority. But we're going to talk about what I have read. If you have recommendations for things that you genuinely think that I will really enjoy, let me know, because I definitely need to be reading better things, and then I would be more encouraged to want to read more as well. There have been some things I've really enjoyed, so it's not all doom and gloom. But anyways, I'm gonna stop rambling about like everything else. This is the first wrap up I've done in months, but we're here to talk about books, so let's do that. So as I said, I only finished 2 books in April. The first one I did actually listen to when I was in New Zealand, and that was Delicious Monsters by Liselle Sambury. This is a YA horror. It was my book club read. I run a little book club in Discord, so it was our book club read for that. And I didn't enjoy this one as much as the previous book I'd read by the author. This is going to be a bit of a test of like how much I remember these books that I read months ago, especially because when I feel meh about books, I like never think about them again. But YA horror, it does definitely have things that you should check trigger warnings for, because there's stuff, you know, like suggestions of like child abuse and various things, right? But ultimately you've got kind of 2 timelines going on. In the past, you've got a girl who can see ghosts, who has moved back to like her mother's old family home, and there's something creepy going on with the house. And then in the like present timeline, you've got a girl who runs like a YouTube show dedicated to like ghost stories and various things. And so she's kind of investigating what happened at that house years ago. And ultimately I enjoyed being in that present timeline more, mostly because the girl we were following in the past, I found her kind of insufferable. Like she definitely had reasons to like, you know, she can see ghosts and stuff, so I understand that things aren't all happy for her, but also like being in her head was just so frustrating and depressing, but also mostly frustrating because of the way she spoke to other people in her life. And I don't know, I did not enjoy her at all as a character. And so even though there was kind of potentially less going on in the present timeline, I just like enjoyed those characters more. So I don't know, I didn't love this book overall, but I didn't hate it either. Like, it was just a, you know, right in the middle, like give it like 3 stars. As I said, I've never really thought about it again because it was a thing I read. It was like, okay, there were things I didn't really like, some things I did think were interesting in the way they were explored, but ultimately forgettable, other than this very moment when I've had to think about it again. The one other thing I read, Laziness Does Not Exist by Dr. Devon Price, who I've read from before. I think it's called Unmasking Autism, which I read an arc of. And I thought that book was really well done, so I'd always been interested in this one. I did think it had a lot of interesting things to say because this is non-fiction. It's about the laziness lie, essentially, and saying that people aren't really lazy. There's usually other things going on, and we need to kind of like let go of this idea of laziness and like give ourselves a break. And that's the kind of things it was talking about, and also kind of exploring the harms of the laziness lie, like the way people can work themselves into the ground and get really sick and all those kind of things, which was kind of interesting in that I was reading this when I was very sick, and probably was very sick because of burnout, because I'd been to New Zealand, which was a great time, but it wasn't like a relaxing holiday. It was a very busy holiday, and then I didn't have any break because I came back and school holidays had ended, so I went back to work like straight from being overseas for a couple of weeks. Straight back into the start of a new term, into full-time work, and then also like a week after that or something was DreamHack, and I had to prepare for that and do all of that. So I definitely think I was burnt out, and I think that's why I got so sick, and I got so sick for so long, and especially because I had to continue working through it too. So I was like really sick for like 6 weeks and having to work full time through it. And yeah, I think, as I said, I think the reason I got as sick as I did was that fact that I had 0 time to rest for many, many weeks, right? So interesting from that respect of that I was reading this book when I was like actually suffering physically from all of those effects that it was kind of talking about. So as I said, a lot of interesting things to say, and I do think that it is a general, like it is genuinely a problem within our society, a lot of these things, and the way people look at other people and the way that they're behaving. And also for me, like, I'm someone who has been called lazy so many times in my life, but like when I reflect back on it, I'm like, because it's often in those, it's often because sometimes I have days where I like lay on the couch and don't do anything, right? But again, it's usually because I've pushed myself so far that that's all I can physically do, especially because I'm not neurotypical, right? But I find it so interesting how many times I've been called lazy, because I'm a full-time teacher. I am a content creator. The amount of content I put out, that's almost a friggin' full-time job as well, that I just don't see very much money back from, occasionally a little bit. And I'm also an artist. I'm now gearing up to go to a bunch of conventions and sell art. Like, I essentially have 3 jobs, right? And even when I first became a teacher, I was also tutoring, so I went straight into having 2 jobs then as well. Like, if anything, I'm a bit of a workaholic, and I regularly physically suffer for it. So it's so funny to me, but it is because of that thing of like, if you see someone spending a day or 2 doing nothing, like you call, like there's this tendency for people to call you lazy, and it's like, but I'm only here because of all of the previous work that has led me here. Like, I don't know. Anyways, I very much resonate with a lot of those ideas and the big problem it is, especially for those of us that are neurodiverse and have serious problems with burnout and things like that, even without overworking. So yeah, so an interesting book and a valuable book, although there were probably also things I struggled with in terms of, like, a lot of what they talked about came down to like making sure you're accommodating for your own needs and not overworking yourself. And like, it talked about things you can do in terms of like how you treat your work and in your workplace to make sure you're not overworking yourself and things like that. But I struggled a bit with it because like, that's all well and good, and like that would all be really valuable and work really well, but I'm in a career where you can't do any of that. Like, teachers are expected to do so much, and you can't really take a step back from it, because like if you did, then you'd have nothing to teach, and like the marking wouldn't get done and all those kind of things, right? So it was a little difficult to read in that respect of like, these are things that should be done and these are things that should be acceptable in our society, but like teaching as a career has not really caught up with that, or it's not very lenient to people or really taking care of the needs of the employees, as it were. Like, I don't know, and I don't even know what the solution is, because again, if teachers backed off from overworking, as most of us do, like, yeah, like schools just wouldn't run. So I don't know what the solution is there. I just know that it was very difficult for me to read, especially someone who was in burnout and was really physically ill, but was going to work every day while really physically ill and not really being able to do anything about it. Because one, I didn't like have the leave to take weeks off. Like, I knew it would take weeks for me to recover fully, but also like teaching isn't a job where you can just stay home and like that's it. Like, often staying home from work just creates more work because you still have to organize everything even though you're not there, and then you fall behind and have more work to do when you get back. Like, it's very, anyways, I'm getting into a rant that I was not expecting to get into here. Anyways, but yeah, this book I think was well done for what it is, but it was also really difficult to read being in a profession that you can't take these measures that were being suggested in this book. And yeah, I don't really know what the solution is. I just know that I struggle on a weekly basis. But yeah, well done book otherwise. I don't know how long I was just ranting. I need to move on. In May, I read 4 books, but as I said, I was really ill for an extended period, so I was really ill for most of May. But it was also my birthday month. And a lot of things I read were shorter. So I read All Systems Red by Martha Wells, which is a novella. So this was really short. This was my Discord book club read for May. This is a sci-fi following murderbot who gets hired out to basically work as like the safety for expedition groups and things like that. Not the safety, the security is the word I'm looking for. But also they just really want to like watch their dramas. They just want to watch TV. They don't really want to be doing other things. But it also had a bit of an exploration of like the morality of using these murder bots who are actually conscious and have their own like wants and desires and things like that. As I said, it was very short, but I did really like this. I ultimately gave it 4 stars, I think. I definitely will want to continue the series at some point. And, you know, I can relate to sometimes just wanting to not have to think about anything else and just binge watch things. I get it, Murderbot. I get it. I read Tempest of Tea by Hafsah Faizal. This was a Melbourne Bookish Book Club read, because on that note of me doing too many things, I'm now also admitting and organising that book club. I should not keep taking on more responsibility. I need to chill out. It's like the opposite of everything I was just talking about in terms of that book, the Laziness book. But anyway, this is the thing I read, and this was like just fine. This is another book I haven't thought about again. This is like a vampire-y, heisty type book. It's YA fantasy. You've got this cast of characters who have to break into like a vampire place and steal stuff, basically to save the tea shop, because you've got this character who owns this tea shop that by night is also secretly like a place that vampires can come to drink blood peacefully and safely and stuff like that. Yeah, this was like fine. I haven't really thought about it again, as I said, so I'm trying to like remember specifically how I felt about it, but I felt like some of it was like interesting and enjoyable, but also like there were some things that I didn't jive with, like the romances in this felt a little bit like, where did that come from? And I'm not really feeling it. And those kind of little things like that. So I think this was another one I gave 3 stars and just haven't thought about again, which I was actually really excited for this one. So a little bit disappointing in that respect. But I also read Hoarded by the Dragon by Lillian Lark, which is a monster romance. I have really enjoyed everything I've read from Lillian Lark, which I've read a few of the other monster romances. I knew going into this that I was going to struggle a little bit because I knew going into it that it had the pregnancy trope, which I personally hate. But I was actually surprised by how much I still managed to enjoy this, because obviously that's a very prevalent part, and I didn't like love all the focus on the pregnancy, breeding type stuff. But I feel like the rest of the plot and the characters and the connection between them made this still a really enjoyable reading experience for me. So even though I hate those tropes and it was such a prevalent part, I was surprised how much I still liked this overall. But yeah, otherwise you've got a character who like breaks in to steal something and then she gets caught, and the one who catches her is the dragon who owns this thing that she's trying to steal, and they end up making like a deal. As you do, a deal that they're gonna sleep together, and in exchange she can take the thing she's trying to steal. Look, questionable setup, but I enjoyed where the plot went from there, so. And then the last thing I read was another non-fiction. It was Create Tools from Seriously Talented People to Unleash Your Creative Life. So this is one of those books that's, you know, yeah, about like embracing your creativity, and it's got like exercises for things you can do to embrace your creative life and whatever. And there were some things in here that were kind of interesting, especially because they had, there were excerpts of like creative people telling their stories or giving their advice, and some of them were very like well-known people that you may have heard of. Don't ask me who, because even though I remember thinking, oh, I know that person a few times while I was listening to it, I don't remember who they were now, because I ultimately didn't like this book. Like, I think there were some things that might have been good takeaways, and there are some things that might have been valuable to other people, just to not to me personally. And I think some of the things that it was preaching was unhealthy, like at some points suggesting things like at one point it said something like, you know, follow what you want to do creativity wise, and just like don't worry about money. The money thing will just fall into place. And I think that's such a dangerous thing to say in the capitalistic society we live in, because although that's the ideal, and to a certain extent, like, yes, follow your dreams, but you can't ignore money. And I don't know the background of all the people who were in this book, so I don't know whether they were already in a privileged situation where they didn't need to worry about that, and like if things hadn't gone well for them, they might have had things to fall back on. But there are so many people who don't have any safety nets. And I know there are like struggling artists who still go out and do that, and they do just really struggle for a while. But like, I don't know, I just think it's so dangerous to perpetuate this idea of like, don't even think about money, it'll all fall into place if that's what's meant to be, because that's just not how our world works. And so there were a few little moments like that that just made me angry at the book, because I think you need to find a balance of like doing what you really want to do and following your passions and following your creativity, but you can't completely ignore those things. We don't live in a society where you can ignore money, because like, you know, you don't want to give people advice that could result in them living on the streets, right? Like, if you don't have family that you can rely on, or, you know, savings and things like that, like, it could be a very dangerous thing. And so, yeah, there were just some moments like that that made me mad at this book, because, like, yes, as much as you want to follow your passions and you want to encourage people to follow their passions, maybe don't ignore some of those dangers and pretend like they don't exist and like it'll all just work out in the end. I don't know. You know, it just, yeah, some things just didn't sit right with me, so it made me mad at this book, even if there might have been valuable takeaways otherwise. I don't know. Not for me. And then in June I finished 2 books. One was The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields, which was Melbourne Bookish Book Club's read for June. This was another one I felt kind of meh about. When I started it, like when I first started it, I was vibing with it because it's like Regency, it's meant to be set in Regency era, and you know, I just binged through Bridgerton, so I was kind of in that vibe. But then it goes into another setting, like out in the country, which obviously feels very different. which is fine, but I did feel a little bit bored by what was going on. And then this plot did pick up, and the plot did become more interesting, and there's kind of a cute sapphic romance going on, right? But I still felt a bit meh about it overall, especially just because of how many things in this book didn't really make sense or were just inconsistent. Like I said, it was supposed to be set in like a Regency era, and you could tell that's what it was going for, but also a lot of it just didn't make sense. Like, queerness was normalized in this, which is fantastic, and it could have been fantastic if it was done well. Like, obviously that's not how it actually was in Regency era, but this is a fantasy book. There's magic and stuff going on, so not everything needs to be realistic, but it does need to make sense. Because like at one point, like the brother of the main character is, you know, alone with another man, and she makes a comment about him being like, you know, unchaperoned, right? And that's a thing of like, if you were a woman unchaperoned and you were caught with a man, like that's scandalous, blah, 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 right? But it made me question like how things work in this world, because does that mean that everyone has to be chaperoned at all times? Because if so, that wasn't actually happening in this book, like at all, at any point. But also, like logistically, how does that work? Like you always have to be with an immediate family member, because it's not like you can have a friend come with you, because if it's a female friend, that's inappropriate. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there were little things like that that didn't actually make sense if you thought about it. And there were a lot of little things like that. So I often found myself not being able to actually follow the story and enjoy it, because there were all of these little like inconsistencies or things that didn't actually make sense. And also, like, I think this is meant to be adult fantasy. It does read a bit YA, which is like fine to an extent, but again, there are too many things that just don't make sense. And also, like, the whole fact she's cursed, but the curse only seems to activate if they're about to like physically do something, because she's cursed like not to have anyone love her. But like, that's in itself isn't love. Like, how come them sitting next to each other and talking like isn't activating it, but when you try to kiss it is? I don't know. The focus on the physicality in the nature of love, some of that didn't also make sense, especially when you consider like the way her grandmother was still able to reproduce. And I don't know, there were just too many things that didn't make sense or were inconsistent. And so the world building was not great, ultimately, I guess is what it comes down to. And so I wasn't able to just enjoy the story because I was too distracted by the fact the world and everything that had been set up didn't actually make sense. So that's ultimately how I felt about The Honey Witch. And then lastly, I read The Haar by David Sodergren. This is a book I liked, but I don't know whether to be concerned about the fact that I like it, and it's definitely not something that I would recommend to everyone. Like, there was only a very small amount of people that I think should read this. Because this is a horror book. It's a gross one. It is a gross one. So basically, you've got this old woman who lives in this little seaside town, and, you know, basically this rich guy with this company is trying to come in and buy everything up so he can develop the area. And she's refusing to move. And so that's kind of the setup. And, you know, they're being very forceful about it, and things happen there, but then she happens to meet something else and gross things happen. But yeah, basically that setup is of her refusing to move. This book was so gross in so many ways, but it was also like kind of heartwarming. By the end I felt very confused, because I'm like, that book was disgusting, but I also have this like sense of, oh, that was so heartwarming, oh, and I don't know how to feel about that. Although there were a couple of scenes that I absolutely hated, like, I mean, I'm not going to say anything that's too spoilery, but like, you know, an underage boy, we didn't need to hear the descriptions of exactly what happened to him and his body parts. I feel like that scene would have been fine if he wasn't a teenager. Like, obviously still gross and disturbing, but if he wasn't a teenager, I wouldn't have felt as weird about it. But anyways, yeah, gross horror book that I ultimately did actually really like outside of like 1 or 2 scenes. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, that's everything that I've read over the past 3 months. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Otherwise, let me know what was the best book that you've read recently. And that's gonna be it. So, see you next time. TTFN. Stasi out.